What is going on, gamers? Aevatrex here, and today we're going to go ahead and talk about migration and why migration, and most importantly, migrating to the right kingdom is essential when you're playing Lords Mobile. Now, my guild just migrated to Kingdom 51, so I want to go ahead and share with you guys what I like to look for when looking for a new kingdom, as well as other things to keep in mind when you are looking for a kingdom. The very first thing, and probably the most important, is actually knowing your guild. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Because knowing your guild is a pretty fundamental thing, right? Well, what I mean by knowing your guild is your guild more of a fighter guild? You're out looking for targets to rally, to solo, etc. on a regular basis? Or is your guild more of a farmer guild where you're mainly preoccupied on farming, growing peacefully, and trying to stay away from a big war? Knowing your guild and knowing what you guys are looking for is the most essential thing when you're looking for a kingdom, because if you're a war guild and you go to a kingdom that doesn't have many wars or targets for you, it's not going to be a very pleasant time. And then on the flip side, if you're more of a farmer guild that you're just growing and you want to do it peacefully, etc., and you go to a kingdom that's full of war, then it's going to be very detrimental to your guild. So that's one of the most important things that you can look to when you're looking for a kingdom. First of all, know your guild and know exactly what kind of kingdom your guild would thrive in, and hone in on those kingdoms. Now, the second thing is knowing your limit. And what exactly do I mean by that? Well, for instance, if your guild is a war guild but it's not a very big guild, then it's probably not a good idea to go to a kingdom that have a ton of full champion 11k heroes and all of that, because if you're caught in fury, and it doesn't matter how good you are of a player, sometimes if you're caught in fury and you don't have the troops to actually defend yourself, and you're in a kingdom that has these crazy people that would carpet every rally, etc., then it's going to be detrimental to your guild. Essentially, you're going to have to stay shielded all the time. If you go in fury, you're always going to be fearful that you're going to be rallied by one of these big people. And if you're going to be rallying one of them, you know that you're going to be counter rallied and probably lose more than you're going to actually kill from the enemy. So you have to know your limit and know exactly who you can and can't go up against. And then at that point, now that you know your guild and you know what kind of kingdom you're looking for, and now you also know what kind of enemies you can and can't handle, then we move on to the biggest part. So the biggest thing when you migrate is kingdom activity, right? So if you're a war guild, you want to make sure that there's plenty of people in this kingdom, there's plenty of targets, and there's a lot of things that you can go ahead and do, whether it's port to a hive and start burning for resources or rallying big targets, etc. You want your kingdom to be full of activity. Now, a great way to actually go ahead and check for activity on a kingdom is if you look at the KVK information, they'll go ahead and give you a list of the rankings of each kingdom. A good idea, and if you don't know exactly where that is, once you go in your castle, you go over here where the hell events are. Once KVK ends, it's going to be all the way to the right. So you click on that and it'll give you the stats for all of the kingdoms, etc. So once you go ahead and you look at the rankings for all of the kingdoms, you can start looking at the top rankings for those kingdoms, because if your kingdom wins KVK compared to everybody else, usually that means that there's good activity on that kingdom. Because it doesn't matter how big your guild is, if it's just one guild or a couple of people getting most of the points, that's not going to beat a kingdom that's full of activity, of tons of people getting scores for that kingdom. So maybe you can start checking out the top 10, top 15 kingdoms that were ranked in KVK. So that's a very good way to actually start looking at what kingdoms are really active. And coincidentally, you can also take a look at what kingdoms are not as active if you're looking for a kingdom that's not full of war, etc., etc. Now, there's also another little thing that I like to point out. Usually people know of what kingdoms are like the big war zones. So for instance, Kingdom 220 was just pretty much a huge war zone. CTK, the guild, was there, and all of that. People were trying to stay clear of this kingdom unless you're looking for a huge war or being in a kingdom where you can get zeroed no matter your might. So now if you look at it, at 220, now you see that CTK has moved on to 198, and it looks like 198 is actually going to become a very, very high populated area with a lot of wars and all of that good stuff. So one thing that you can always keep in mind, as you can tell, look at this, they're ready to go. So one thing that you can always keep in mind is, if there is a kingdom that there's a lot of wars going on, especially huge wars like ALH6, CTK, SGK, all of that, these are the same kingdoms that in a few weeks are gonna have nobody, because everybody's gonna migrate and move on to their next kingdom, and usually the kingdom that they leave behind is not gonna be very active. It's not gonna have many people that are looking for war. They basically just leave the kingdom barren. So if you're a guild that just wants a fresh start and you're looking for something peaceful, once you identify one of these kingdoms that are full of war, and I mean like really high quality war, once they move on, these might be one of the best kingdoms that you can go into, because not only were they just in the forefront and now everybody's moving on, the possibility of somebody else that's a big guild moving in right as everybody else moved out is also very low. So that's a very good way of actually trying to find a kingdom where you can get a very good new start, if you will. And then of course with migration, it comes the cost of scrolls. Now for the most part, if your guild doesn't have a ton of high mites, etc., most of the time it's not going to cost you many scrolls. But if you're like me and you have a pretty decent amount of might, and your guild is full of people that have a pretty decent amount of might like myself, so the other thing that you have to worry about is, does everybody have the scrolls to actually move? Now of course IGG sells the bundle in the store every couple of weeks for the migration scrolls. The only problem is that that bundle doesn't really include anything else. So one of the best practices that I have taken up for myself is, for the guild shop and the guild coins, I do not use them for anything else other than migration scroll. I've migrated now 3 times with just using the guild coins that I get from gifts, and right now I have 6 migration scrolls just after my fresh migration, and I can buy 36 more. So essentially I have 42 scrolls. I've used about 40 something in my other migrations in total, and all of those came from guild coins. Now I understand that a lot of people use the guild coins for things like random relocators, jewels, etc. But if you're a higher might and you don't want to spend on migration scrolls, then this is also one thing that I would suggest you start doing. Make sure that you don't use your guild coins on things that you can use your other gems on, and save them only for migration scrolls. Also, just as a last tip, if you're gonna be migrating as a guild, make sure that you tell your guild ahead of time, and I mean a couple of days beforehand, when it is that you're gonna be making the move. That way everybody is ready. And the best case scenario is if you guys start migrating highest might at a time. So for instance, Kuda will be the first one to migrate, then myself, then Congo, etc. Because the more higher mights that migrate first, the actual less cost of the migration scrolls that the lower might people are going to cost. So it's a very cost effective way to do it that way, instead of just everybody just randomly migrating at the same time and paying more scrolls than they really need to, if it's done the right way. But yeah, appreciate you guys for watching, and hopefully these tips will help you and your guild to find a great kingdom and help you move the right way. Yeah, appreciate you guys for watching, and until later, bye.